Hi, I'm Richard Bermack, your host for today. Thanks for joining us for the West Coast Annual Lincoln Brigade Celebration, brought to you by the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives. ALBA is dedicated to preserving the Lincoln Brigade's legacy of activism and social justice. In the 1930s, the Spanish people elected a democratic government that instituted universal health care, education, land reform, employment, women's rights, and religious freedoms. But the new republic was short-lived. A military invasion led by Franco and aided by the fascist governments of Hitler and Mussolini resulted in a civil war. When the so-called democratic nations turned their backs on the new republic, people from all over the world came to Spain and joined in a fight to save the republic and stop the spread of fascism. Unfortunately, this republic was defeated, and a few months later, Hitler's forces invaded Poland, and World War II began. 2 days ago, the congressional January 6 hearings made it clear that Trump and his minions conspired with violent extremist groups to seize control of the government. A fascist wave is again threatening the world and the United States. ALBA takes this threat very seriously. Today's show will pay tribute to the vets' fight in Spain and to the efforts to turn back the current fascist tide. And now we'll hear from Vice Chair of ALBA, Maria Hernandez Ojeda, who will tell you a bit more about today's program.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Richard. We're very grateful to you and to the entire ALBA group in the Bay Area for making this exciting event possible today. To everyone who's watching, on behalf of ALBA, welcome. We are very excited to present today's program, which includes a fantastic keynote speech by author and narrative strategist Jeff Chang. We will also learn from this year's ALBA Puffin Award winner, Life After Hate, an organization that helps people leave the violent far right. Afterward, you will enjoy a presentation honoring the Asian International Volunteers of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and a wonderful live music performance at Berkeley. And it is an honor for me to introduce Jeff Chang. Jeff epitomizes the role of the public intellectual who is fully committed to social change. His speech today provides a useful framework to connect the legacy of the Lincoln Brigade with urgent contemporary issues, namely the national and international rise in fascism and autocracy. Personally, I will certainly use today's keynote address by Jeff Chang in my own courses. And teaching is at the core of what we do here at ALBA. For over 10 years, our high school institutes have reached more than 1,000 teachers, and through them, tens of thousands of students. They have learned about the men and women who fought fascism in Spain, and it helped them understand the legacy of international solidarity and activism. This past year, ALBA offered twice a fully online 4-week workshop through which teachers all over the US and the world can earn professional development credit. And this November 8th coming up, Sebastian Faber and Peter Carroll will offer the traditional Election Day workshop entitled America and World Fascism, Human Rights from the Spanish Civil War to Nuremberg and Beyond. And this is a classic yearly event that has been attended by hundreds of New York teachers. They receive 10 hours of professional credit in social studies, Spanish, and English language arts. And one of the essential questions the participants discuss in this workshop is, why should we care about events that take place half a world away? Well, I believe that Jeff Chang will address this compelling question in his keynote speech today. Here is author and narrative strategist Jeff Chang.
Greetings. My name is Jeff Chang, and I'm honored to be able to speak with you all today at the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives. I'm a writer and a cultural organizer, and I'm someone who, like many of you, shares an interest in social history and works in the arts of documentation. And so I'm a little bit ashamed to say that when I was first invited to speak to you all by Richard Bermack, I didn't know much about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. What I knew of the Spanish Civil War, I knew from culture. As someone very young, I'd been enchanted by hip-hop and punk rock. I'd heard the Clash singing Spanish Bombs, and I knew of Picasso's Guernica because it was the favorite painting of an artist hero of mine named Jean-Michel Basquiat. And now, after several weeks of immersing myself belatedly in the work of you all and many other writers, musicians, and artists, especially the voices of the original freedom fighters on the ground, I'm saddened that I did not know more about their story earlier. And I understand that I missed one of the greatest stories in our shared history of commitment, solidarity, and love for humanity. But along with all that Joe Strummer evoked when he sang of the hillsides ringing with "Free the People" and the trenches full of poets, I too have now heard the echoes of 39, and they're now forever a part of my memory to carry and to share with others as well. I also understand that the disappearing of this history has not been by accident, that these are exactly the kinds of stories that they who maintain a violent, oppressive, brutal status quo, in which so many of us are othered, are humiliated, are segregated and resegregated, are disenfranchised and disavowed, that these are the stories that they've tried to bury and throw dirt upon. When I read about the Nazis using the lands of the indigenous people of Spain as target practice for their bombers and air fighters, I thought of Vieques in Puerto Rico, and I thought of Makua Valley on Oahu, and Kaho'olawe, where the American war machine destroyed sacred sites and rendered the land unplantable. Justice is about restoring the land to those who know it, cherish it, and caretake it. And this is what the brigade was fighting for. When I read about the ways in which the Franco regime stamped out the cultures and languages of the Basque and Catalan people, I think about the ways my ancestors' tongues were silenced, that only now have my nieces and nephews, and even myself, been able to learn and speak Olelo Hawaii, the Hawaiian language, 3 generations after it was officially suppressed through forced Americanization. Cultural justice is about healing and remedying the erasure, suppression, and marginalization of people's artistic and cultural practices, their languages, and their expressions. And this too is what the brigade was fighting for. That poor and working class Americans, and even some with privilege, who had little or no experience with a people or a culture a world away, but would go there to give their lives for those people's freedoms and for ours, is just powerfully inspiring. As someone who thinks about narrative a lot, one thing I know is that we always have an extra burden. Those of us who are committed to working for justice, we have an extra burden compared to those whose job it is to merely defend the status quo. We have to convince a majority to believe in and act towards building a world that they've not yet seen. But we have imagination on our side. We have joy on our side, and we have the future on our side. We live by the creed that Toni K. Bambara, the brilliant Black feminist author, formulated, that the job of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. The beauty of the story of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade is that it shows us that solidarity and commitment are never in vain. These men and women persisted on the battlefield, and even after they returned, persisted through years of persecution. But through these lives of solidarity and commitment, we were all able to see windows of freedom open in Spain and even in the US, even if it was decades after they fought. And their stories tell us what we are all capable of becoming together. One of the most beautiful sayings to come out of this last decade of social uprisings, from Black Lives Matter to Me Too, to the movement of undocumented youths, to those supporting the Ayotzinapa 43, is this one from the Greek poet Dinos Christianopoulos. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know that we were seeds. And so I'm thankful to Joe Strummer, to Jean-Michel Basquiat, to all of you for telling and retelling these stories. And most of all, I'm moved anew by the freedom fighters from the Harama Valley and the Ebro River to Standing Rock and Mauna Kea. Those who chose to be seeds, who choose to continue to fight and to pass it forward. Stories are always alive as long as we caretake them, and we do this so that they will be there in the times we most need them. And that time, as you all know, is now. In my work, we've done and seen a lot of public opinion surveys of late, and the one thing we've learned is that in this moment especially, Americans are very scared. They're not sure if they're safe from pandemics, from guns, from climate change, or from war. They don't feel valued and they don't feel heard. They feel like their freedoms are under attack. And when people are fearful, and we've seen how fearful people can be over the past decade, we have to remind ourselves to ask, how do we build community? How do we bring people beyond their fear to embrace each other? President Biden, who's not known as a radical anything, actually got it right when he said that a battle is now being waged for the soul of America. And it's a clash of competing narratives. The story of a great America that's being lost forever versus the story of a hopeful emerging America, the end of American civilization or the beginning of a great national transformation. These are times that Orwell would have recognized. When President Biden reminded us last month of the threats that fascism poses to us, Donald Trump Jr. said it was, quote, a speech that looked like if Mussolini and Hitler got together, unquote. Apparently, he too knows nothing about the Spanish Civil War. It's really not hard to wonder what side his family would have been on in 1936. His father's the same demagogue who, when challenged to deal forthrightly to prevent the spread of a pandemic, instead chose to demonize Asian Americans, leading to tens of thousands of incidents of hate and violence against us. We are all at a crossroads right now in our nation's history. Shall the U.S. continue to advance a culture of domination of the few over the many, or shall it build a culture of shared power, of what Martin Luther King Jr. called mutuality? Shall it continue to pursue a path that leads us to a burning, flooding planet where the 1% will leave the rest of us to die? Or will we come together to figure out how to make it livable and equitable for all? The U.S. is about to become a majority minority. In the next decade or so, more than half of all people in the U.S. will not be white. We'll all be minorities. It's a grand experiment on a scale that's never happened in the world. And so we face two major questions. The first is, how will we come together to achieve climate justice? Especially for the people who suffer the most now, Alaska Natives and Pacific Islanders who face melting caps and rising seas, communities of color and people who are poor, who must suffer extreme heat and cold, those in the path of corporations who would poison our water and our air. And the second is, if we're all minorities, how will we form a new majority? What values will our community rest in? Will we continue to tolerate a world of exploitation, extraction, and segregation? Or will we be able to make a world of dignity, equity, and freedom for all? In these politically polarized times, intensified by the velocity of technology, most of us feel caught in between extremes. But being in between can be a space of creativity. What it requires first of us is to come off the fence. Being in between means one can afford to sit on the fence, decide not to take a stand, to always reserve the privilege while the battle rages all around us, to disengage. The privilege is in not showing up. And it's time for all of us to show up. Or as the veteran nurse Ruth Davidal put it, we learned in Spain not to just talk, but to act. And then the creativity begins, engaging the fight to resist fascism and oppression, building the new systems of care and compassion to bring freedom to all, activating the relations of community that bring sustenance, devotion, and joy. When I hear and read the stories of Oliver Law, of Jack Shirai, of Louis Orr, of Ruth Davidal, of Bob and Marion Merriman and so many others, it reminds me that all of them gave their lives for a better world. In this moment, as war explodes on the Ukrainian frontier, as the rumblings in the Taiwan Straits have much of Asian America on edge, as we struggle to figure out how to return to community after this atomizing event that's been the global pandemic. In this moment, as many Black, Indigenous, transgender, and immigrant people continue to live in fear of state and individual violence, we know that it's time for us to find our connections, to make our commitments, to join together, and to act. Thank you again for your invitation. I want to wish you all the best in all you do.
Wow, there's so much in Jeff's speech to think about. One thing I'd like to mention for those interested in the Ayotzinapa 43, Reveal, an online podcast by the Center of Investigative Reporting, has just published a 4-part series after Ayotzinapa by Anasi Diaz-Cortez and human rights investigator Kate Doyle. You can find the story at revealnews.org. Kate Doyle chaired ALBA's Human Rights Committee, which selected Life After Hate for the ALBA Puffin Human Rights Award. She explains why they chose Life After Hate this year. The ferocious attack on democracy 1 year ago laid bare how deeply right-wing extremist groups have embedded in our country and our culture. Life After Hate is one of the few organizations in the United States dedicated to dismantling networks of hate, white supremacy, and neo-Nazism, one person at a time. Neil Rosenstein, vice president of the Puffin Foundation, stated that to combat hate-filled white nationalists, we need to vote, we need to protest, we need to teach students about human rights and this country's often shameful history. We need to pass laws outlawing bigotry and hate speech and crimes of bias. We also need to reach the individual hearts and minds of those who have embraced hate in our communities. Today we are in another fight against fascism, but the battlefield has changed. Lincoln vet Robert Claudney, in his famous speech about Vietnam, talked about how in Spain, to act meant to go fight in a war, but in Vietnam, it meant to resist a war. In the U.S. today, it means to prevent a civil war. We need to diffuse the bigotry and nationalist hatred fueling these extremist groups. To do that, we need to use the creativity and compassion, as Jeff Chang suggested. 2, as Neil Rosenstein stated, win over the hearts and minds of those who've embraced hate. You're about to hear how Life After Hate works with former members of extremist groups using compassion, understanding, and help these formers find a new sense of purpose and healing through helping others. And doing this is not easy. First, we're going to view a video produced by Life After Hate, in which formers caution people about the dangers of joining right-wing groups. This is the premiere showing of the video. It is part of a new series Life After Hate is launching. After the video, you'll hear excerpts from an interview we did with Patrick Rickards, the executive director of Life After Hate. Now you'll hear about Life After Hate.
Before joining the movement, I was pretty broken kid. I really was looking for
say, okay, I belong here now.
This feeling of like camaraderie and brotherhood, like you can trust these guys because they got you, and man, that was pretty far from the actual truth. But they got you, but there's a whole bunch of stipulations. They don't bother telling you about all that when you start. But
had always said, okay, we'll always be there for you, so on and so forth. But the thing is, a lot of the time when I was on the streets, it was actually just me fending for myself.
There were all these ideals of like brotherhood and camaraderie and support that the movement espoused, and love of race and all that stuff. But my actual lived experience of being in the movement was that there was just an intense amount of infighting and backstabbing and, harm against each other as much or more really as we were harming people outside of our groups.
It's isolative. That's what it is. These movements end up isolating people so much so. And that was it. I was on my own. It was like the loneliness was beyond anything I'd ever felt. But there was a group of people around. But imagine a whole bunch of people who were alone.
If something seems too good to be true, chances are it is. So when I talk about a movement that claims to be able to fill every emotional need of somebody, that does sound too good to be true. And the thing is, it always fell short.
You have to really look at the reality of what is going on with the group you're in, the actual personal interactions and how people actually treat each other as opposed to what they say they should treat each other like and what they say their ideals are.
What is your life like now?
Oh, my life's good now. I tell you what, my life's good.
I just have a life that is fulfilling to me now.
There's not one person that I know who's left these movements who's like, damn it, I shouldn't have done that. If you want to go, if you want to leave, and if you need support, there's stuff there.
But it's not impossible. It's far from impossible. You can get your life back. You can. It just takes a little bit of work and a lot of soul searching. It's hard shit, but it's worth it.
I think life after hate is a sign of hope.
That being involved in violent extremism doesn't have to be the end point of your life.
There's life on the other side. There's happiness on the other side. Hate doesn't have to consume everything in your world forever.
Life after hate means, I'd say, a safe place to learn how to live again.
What are Life After Hate's greatest accomplishments?
Life After Hate is the first organization in the country that's recognized one has an ability to take those who are members of the violent far right and begin to work with them so that they can de-radicalize and disengage and begin to allow them to write a new chapter to their lives. We were created actually by formers themselves who recognized that there needs to be a path, there needs to be a way forward that wasn't available to them when they decided to leave the movement, but had to be available to others. And so we can look at the individuals that we work with each and every day, the loved ones that come to us because they're worried about a husband or a boyfriend or somebody else in their family that's either going down the path toward extremism or maybe looking to actually exit the life. We look at those individuals that we work with, and we've evolved as an organization. It used to just be peer-to-peer counseling. It used to be formers talking to those who wanted to become formers. We've now gotten much better at making sure that we have the clinical staff, we have the individuals with the medical training, with the social work training that are necessary to be involved in this process, particularly when you deal with some of the psychological and emotional risks that are involved. We look at the work that we're doing now in terms of engaging with law enforcement, helping them better understand the violent far right and how they're going to interact with them.
Why do people join the far right, and why is it hard for them to leave?
They largely joined the violent far right because they believed they had nowhere else to go. They believed nobody else understood them. Their families didn't get them. Society didn't get them. Somehow the propaganda of the far right worked for them. And they left everything they knew behind. They left their family. They left their friends. They largely left school because they tend to be teenagers. And they left that all behind for the life in the movement. And so when it's time for them to exit, it can be enormously scary because they're recognizing that they're now going to have to leave that behind as well. The life that they've known for 3, for 5, for 10 years, everything has to be left behind. All of their friends, all of their loved ones, all of the places they used to go, the bars they used to drink at, the music festivals they used to go to, all of that has to be left behind. And they have to leave it behind with the hope, with the promise that society is going to accept them back in. There's no guarantee for that. And so they're taking a huge step in trusting the clinical workers at Life After Hate, in trusting the formers that counsel them, the peers that work with them, in really trusting that we're going to provide them a path to getting that redemption.
It sounds like they have a big gap in their life to fill. and they have to find something positive to fill it with. A lot of people are really angry and upset about the way things are going in the society and its unjust nature. Anger drove people in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade to go to Spain, but they were driven by also a desire to build a better society for all, a society based on equality and without racism and fascism.
I look at a lot of the individuals who are formers, those who have exited the movement, and they finally are starting to embody, some of those principles that you can see with the Abraham Lincoln Brigades. They're finally realizing they have to put others over themselves. They have to rebuild some of those past relationships. They start investing in things that are far greater than themselves. I see that. I have a number of formers that work at Life After Hate, that work directly with individuals, counseling them, advising them, serving as peer mentors. That we don't necessarily appreciate it all the time, how enormously hard that sort of work is, because you put in all of the effort to get out of this movement. And then they have to come to work each and every day and relive it through each of their peers. Every conversation they have is going to connect to something that was them at some of the worst moments of their lives. And they're willing to do it because they believe society can be a better, stronger, more positive place if they are willing to share their stories and they're willing to do the work so that others can benefit from where they've already walked.
What are the people you work with like? Are they all like the violent extremists we saw at Charlottesville or at the Capitol on January 6th?
It's very easy for us to look at those photos out of Charlottesville. And you look at those very angry white men with tiki torches and battle flags who are trying to reclaim their country. It's very easy to define the far right as that. I think the more and more that we get into it, we realize, the far right looks like your sister. It looks like your brother. It looks like your best friend from high school. It looks like all of those people that you knew that maybe just never quite fit in when they were younger. And all of a sudden they found a place.
Can you talk about the recruiters and how they play on people's desperation?
It becomes very easy with the right propaganda to have somebody, I think we see that in today's day and age, to have somebody that is going to feel like someone else is going to embrace them. We use the right language, we engage with them in the right way, you defend them on the right online chats, and all of a sudden we believe, oh, he understands me, he gets me. When in reality, all he is he's a recruiter. He's trying to get you to join the movement because you can't exactly set up a storefront and sign up people as you would for the armed forces. And so you're preying on those people that are so desperate for a connection, that are so desperate for a place to belong, that you're willing to do or say anything in order to get them there.
How's it different for this generation?
With the newer generation, quite honestly, it becomes easier to prey on them. It becomes easier to reach them. If you look at the evolution of the violent far right, and which really wasn't in the United States until the 1990s, at least not in an organized way. That recruitment was largely done through music. You were bringing, white pride music over from Germany, and you were distributing it on the down low in the United States because you couldn't buy it at the record store. And so you were finding, you were connecting through the music. You were connecting through live events, and then the recruitment process would begin. And you saw it in major cities, that recruitment process. You can now do it on YouTube, and you can do it on TikTok, and you can do it on Twitch when people are playing video games, and all of those private areas where you can begin to make those connections. In many ways, it becomes a recruiter's dream. On TikTok, you start following certain hashtags and certain streams, and again, you start identifying people who have, if not shared activities, you hope that they have shared beliefs. And that's what becomes so dangerous about this, because I have a couple buddies that I'm gaming with and I absolutely love it, and they start spewing this hate. Whether it was when you and I were kids, Richard, or now, you start saying some of the same things your buddies are saying because you don't want them to think you're strange. You start saying it enough, you start hearing it enough, at some point you might start believing it.
So the far right has become as mainstream as video games and the internet, with lawyers and politicians.
Unfortunately, the last 5 or 6 years have made it cool to be racist again. There are a number of organizations across the country that are preaching this sort of hate and are acting on it. You look at individuals who Their management styles are different, but what they do is different. You have organizations that are going to serve as the strategists. We have organizations that are going to serve as the financing. You have organizations that are going to do the TV interviews. You have the propagandists, and then you have the muscle. There's now no matter what you want to do, if you want to be part of violent far right, there's an opportunity for you. And so that really, it makes it much more difficult. I mean, because you're right, you don't know that the person sitting next to you in a suit and tie at church, whether he's a member of this or not. And so, it's a matter of really understanding how so much of this works. I think that one of the great statements I heard recently is that hate is an incredibly powerful unifier. And it cuts both ways. I think hate is an incredible unifier for those who want to practice it and those who believe it. But hate can also be an incredible unifier for those of us who want to address it, who want to do something about it.
Talk about your use of storytelling.
What we've seen in terms of our own storytelling is it's really had to evolve. If you look at Life After Hate in its early days, our founders, the formers themselves would go around the country and would tell their stories again and again and again. And as I said, it's enormously powerful when you have an individual who's standing up for you and is talking about what it was like at the worst moment in their life when they hit rock bottom.
You talk about how the media seems only interested in hearing about traumatic details and how reliving those experiences can be devastating for the formers.
But what we see in today's society, I think the way that we want to engage with individuals is, unfortunately, the phrase I would use is they want to engage in trauma porn. They want to go in and see somebody at their worst so that they can feel better about themselves at their current state. And so, we tend to be more careful in terms of how we use the former stories. When they feel comfortable, they're going to go and they'll share those stories in person. But we're no longer forcing it. You look at how the violent far right itself has evolved. And you look at how they've used online and how they've been able to use different platforms to get information out. We as an organization, we as a field are looking to do the same thing. I think we can use the power of video. We can use short segments that'll work on YouTube, that'll work on TikTok, that'll work on our website. And we can use that in a way to capture stories in a very respectful way, to understand how an individual decided to go down the road of violent far right extremism, and what it was that helped them get off that path. I think as we tell these tales, the hope is the more we can share them, the more that we can get them out there, the more that we can do them in a consumable way so that somebody doesn't have to sit down at a computer and watch a 2-hour video documentary, but instead on their phone can watch a 2 or 3 minute video where it looks like you're doing just about anything else. And that you're going to hear that message. You're going to hear that hope. You're going to hear that spark. You're going to realize somebody's been in the exact same spot you were and they were able to turn around their lives. That's what we want to do. We want to tell these stories in a different way. We really want to be able to begin to collect an oral history that we can capture, that we can share, that we can distribute, and that we can use. Because I think there are a lot of organizations out there that want to help. And now what we need to do is really redouble our efforts to make sure that those people in need of help know where they can go. And that's what we're using storytelling for.
What's your future plans?
We're looking to launch a campaign that's going to focus on no former left behind. How do we make sure that those who have exited the movement are getting the supports that they need to continue to reintegrate into society? We're looking at building a specific program that is targeting veterans. Really, I think when you look at the number of individuals who will leave the armed forces and will join the violent far right, there are a number of reasons for it, including our government letting them down, not providing them the psychological services, the medical services that they need after they exit combat. What can we do to help them? We're also looking at what we can do to support the women that are caught up in all of this, but also how do we help guide, educate, support loved ones as they're trying to get individuals out of the movement. We'll be developing a whole public education campaign for that in 2023. So for anybody who would want to help Life After Hate, whether it be, an individual that would be great for us to talk to, an organization we should be partnering with, you've got a local police station that you think would benefit from the course that we've developed for law enforcement on how to work with the violent far right, whatever it is, I would urge you, please reach out to us, info@lifeafterhate.org. And we will get back to you. We will take whatever help we can.
Wow, it's been a great conversation. Your work sounds pretty exciting and important. and it would be important work to work with you. What inspiring work. In the next part of the program, you're going to hear about the Asians in the International Brigade. The Trump presidency started by inciting racism and attacks on immigrants. When the COVID crisis hit, he once again took a page from Hitler's playbook. Find a minority group to blame and victimize them. He picked Asians. The Bay Area has a rich Asian heritage and has benefited so much from Asian culture. Suddenly, we saw the rise of hate crimes against Asians. In response to this attack, the Bay Area ALBA group decided it was time to honor the Asian veterans of the International Brigades. Len and Nancy Sau began their quest to document the Asian Lincoln International Brigade members in the late 1980s. They had first learned about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade going to protests and demonstrations against U.S. intervention in Latin America. They wondered who all these white-haired people were at all the demonstrations. Then they saw the movie The Good Fight and attended the VALB 50th reunion. They met Steve Nelson, Ken Grabar, Jim Persoff, and other vets. At that reunion, they saw a roster of vets, and when they found Asian names, they decided it was their mission to find out more. Nancy was a research chemist and Len a semiconductor researcher. In their spare time, they spent 10 years traveling all over to a dozen countries, visiting archives, interviewing veterans, their families, members, and friends. The resulting book, The Call of Spain, The Chinese Volunteers in the Spanish Civil War, has been published in Spanish and Chinese. They've written numerous articles for The Volunteer, which you can find on the ALBA Volunteer website. They've been active in both the New York and West Coast ALBA groups. And now, as a tribute to the Asian Lincoln vets, Nancy will present what they found.
At the time of the Spanish Civil War, people in Asia were preoccupied with their struggle for independence against the colonialism. And China was fighting for her own survival against the Japanese invasion. In spite of their national crisis, some Asians made their way to Spain to fight against fascism. Who were these Asian volunteers? We have identified 36 Asians fighting against the fascism in Spain. They were Chinese, Filipinos, Indians, Indonesian, Japanese, and Vietnamese. A few went directly from Asia, and most went from Europe and the US, or reside in Spain at the time. Here we highlight some Asians who served in the Lincoln Battalion or with the Americans. Wen Rao-Chen was born in China in 1913. As a teenager, he immigrated to United States and worked as a waiter in New York Chinatown. And he was dedicated to workers' rights at Chinese Workers Center in New York. In June 1937, Chen left New York for Spain under an assumed name, Dong Hong Ik, and he joined the Lincoln Battalion. He fought in the war Belchite in September 1937. His right foot was hit by bullets, so he was evacuated to Beni Kassim Hospital. His hospital war mate was Kenneth Grabar. He took a photo of Chen in the Beni Kassim Hospital. While recuperating in Beni Kassim Hospital, Chen wrote a letter to a New York-based Chinese Vanguard newspaper reporting his battle and his hospital stay. Chen also organized a fundraising committee with 2 other Americans to help raising funds for the Asturias refugees. In December 1937, Chen was recovered and returned to his unit, ready to go to the front. The last battle he fought was in Gandasa. He was killed during the retreat. on April 3, 1938. Qi Zhang was born in China in 1900. At age 18, he traveled to United States and studied in the University of California at Berkeley for 2 years. Then he transferred to University of Minnesota and earned a degree in mining engineer. Right after the 1929 stock market crash, Qi Zhang suffered from neuritis and he was laid off. The painful experience radicalized him. In March 1937, Qi Zhang left New York with the Thorntons to Spain. He joined the 15th Brigade and worked as a truck driver, but his poor health forced him to work in office. He designed concrete pillbox and taught military surveying at officers' training school. Qi Zhang was tall but frail. In March 1938, he was sick again and was sent to Mercia Hospital, where he met some Chinese volunteers. Qi Zhang was then transferred to Orihuela Hospital, where he met Curly Mende and other Americans. Qi Zhang told Curly Mende that he wanted to go back to China to fight. Qi Zhang left Spain for Paris in July 1938. By the end of the same year, he arrived in Hong Kong. In 1944, the Worker newspaper in New York published a photo of Qi Zhang, reporting that he is now with the Chinese Fourth Army. Jack Shirai was born in Hakodate, Japan, around 1900. At age 12, he escaped the orphanage and worked on various kinds of jobs. At age 29, he jumped ship, arrived in New York, and worked as a cook. He participated in various demonstrations and strikes, including the 1934 West Coast waterfront strikes in San Francisco. The day after Christmas 1936, Shirai went with the first group of American volunteers sailing to Spain. He joined the Lincoln Battalion, working as a chief chef. Shirai protested that he came to Spain to fight, not to cook. His political commissar, Steve Nelson, convinced him to continue to cook in the kitchen, but allowed him to hold a rifle when fighting began. Finally, Shirai was able to fight with a gun. On July 11, 1937, Shirai was killed in the Battle of Brunete. That same night, his comrade buried him near an olive tree. Lincoln vet Sam Walters took this photo on site. Shirai was the only Japanese who fought on the Republic side in the Spanish Civil War. Amatio Luna Ortega was born in the Philippines in 1901. In 1927, he immigrated to the United States. He attended the College of Engineering and worked as an engineering draftsman. As a union member, he participated in numerous demonstrations and strikes, resulting in arrests and trials. In January 1937, Luna went to Spain and joined the 15th Brigade. Luna participated in the Battle of Jarama and Brunete. Although he was never wounded, fatigue led him to withdraw from the front. In July 1937, he worked as a guard in the No. 1 hospital at Villa Paz. Tion Big was born in Indonesia in 1906. In 1929, Chu left Indonesia for the Netherlands and studied medicine at the University of Amsterdam. He and 3 students formed an organization called the Indonesian Chinese Association, advocating for Indonesia's independence from Dutch colonial rule. In September 1937, Chu arrived in Spain and worked at Marora Rehabilitation Center as a doctor. Here's a photo of Chu with his colleagues. After fighting at Teruel, Chu joined the anti-aircraft battery in the 14th Brigade in early 1938. American vet Jim Persoff recalled that during the 6 weeks fighting, everyone was exhausted and worn out. Nevertheless, Dr. Chu was with us all the time. He also said Chu was quiet, diligent, and hardworking. Persoff kept a vaccination certificate signed by Dr. Chu in 1938. In February 1939, Chu was repatriated to France. He was held in girls' internment camp with 5 Chinese volunteers. They finally left the camp in October 1939. In January 1940, Chu arrived in Yan'an working as a doctor. A group photo showed Chu with Mao Zedong and other doctors in Yan'an in 1940. Gopal Hudar was born in India in 1902. He longed for taking actions to liberate India from British colonial rule. In 1931, he planned a train robbery to fund the purchase of weapons and ammunition. He was caught and jailed for 4 years. In 1936, he went to England to study journalism, where he witnessed the powerful international solidarity movement for the Spanish people's fight against fascism. In October 1937, he went with the British volunteers to Spain under an assumed name, John Smith. On April 3, 1938, in the Battle of Gandesa, Hudar was taken prisoner by Franco's army. Hudar was imprisoned in San Pedro de Cardenia with Carl Geiser from New York. After imprisonment for half a year, with a stroke of luck, Hudar, the lone Indian POW, was set free along with British POWs in November 1938. Arriving at London, Hudar was given a public reception as a hero. In December 1938, Hudar returned to Bombay, India, and wrote a statement, "Spain and Ourselves." He wrote, "Democracy extinguished in Spain would entail not only the victory of barbarism in Western Europe, but the same weapons will be used for crushing the movement for our own independence." This statement reflected the views of all these Asian volunteers.
Thanks, Nancy and Lynn, for that wonderful presentation. I would also like to thank the two of you for all the photographs you've taken over the years at Lincoln Brigade events. The next part of our program is a musical production, The Eyes of the World, Ron Madrid. Music is the drumbeat of social movements and preserves the memory of struggles. Like many in his generation, Spanish Bombs by The Clash was Jeff Chang's first introduction to the Spanish Civil War. You just heard how the extreme right uses German white nationalist heavy metal music as a recruiting vehicle. Spanish Civil War songs are sung all over the world and have helped keep the memory of the international brigades alive. Tom Lear, in the lyrics to the folk song Army, sang, "Remember the war against Franco, that's the kind where we each of us belong. Though he may have won all the battles, we had all the good songs." The 1960s was famous for protest music, and Feel Like I'm Fixing to Die by Country Joe and the Fish brought the absurdity of the Vietnam War home for many of my generation. Bruce Barthol was Country Joe's original bass player and later became music director of the San Francisco Mime Troupe. Bruce started playing at Lincoln Brigade events in 1973. At one point, Peter Glazer and Bruce started putting together theater pieces with Spanish Civil War songs and readings. Bruce recruited Mime Troupe members, and they created shows like Postscript to a War in 1995. Around 2000, they decided to add historical images, creating a multimedia effect. I worked with them and Judy Montell, who had produced Forever Activists, a documentary about the vets. The programs were shown nearly every year in the Bay Area and New York, from 2000 to 2015. Unfortunately, we never made a quality recording of those programs. This year is different. We are presenting to you The Eyes of the World Were on Madrid, recorded for posterity at the Berkeley Durham Studio Theater on September 17th. We would like to thank the UC Berkeley Department of Theater, Dance and Performance Studies for use of the space. And now, let's go to The Eyes of the World Are on Madrid.
Viva la quince brigada, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Viva la quince brigada, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Nosotros contra los moros, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Luchamos contra los moros, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Mercenarios y fascistas, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Mercenarios y fascistas, ay Manuela, ay Manuela.
In the spring of 1936, there was a lot of bad news.
Hitler occupies the Rhineland.
Mussolini annexes Ethiopia.
Japan takes Shanghai province.
Mosley's black shirts march in England.
O'Duffy's blue shirts in Ireland.
And silver shirts, along with the Bund and the Klan, march in the USA.
Fascism seems unstoppable.
What did you hear on the radio in the United States in the early 1930s?
Father Charles E. Coughlin, the fighting priest, was voted the most useful citizen of 1933.
Each week, he spoke to 30 million people.
Ladies and gentlemen, the system of international finance, which has crucified the world to the cross of depression, was evolved by Jews for the holding the people of the world under control.
What did you read in the newspapers?
14 felled in war at Ohio factory. Strike breakers fire on pickets at Black & Decker plant in Kent. New York Times, June 16, 1936.
Japan-Nazi Accord. Hitler greets new Tokyo envoy with unusual friendliness. San Francisco Examiner.
Ex-President Herbert Hoover excoriates New Deal as fascism, demanding a holy crusade for freedom. New York Times, 6/11/36.
There was a bright spot. Elections in Spain brought to power the Popular Front coalition of the parties of the left and center. Spain could continue moving from the 18th century to the 20th, and with the vote, a blow against fascism felt worldwide had been struck. A new republic instituting universal health care, education, land reform, employment, women's rights, and religious freedom.
And just because he's human, he doesn't like a pistol to his head. He wants no servants under him and no boss over his head. So
left 2, 3, so left 2, 3.
The work that we must do.
March on in the Workers' United Front,
For
you are a worker too. Y como ser humano, lo que quiere es su pan.
Las habladurías le bastan ya porque estás nada de tal. Pues un, dos, tres, compañero en tu lugar, porque eres de pueblo, afíliate ya en el Frente Popular.
Tu es ouvrier, oui, viens avec nous amis, n'aie pas peur. Nous allons vers la grande union de tous les vrais travailleurs. Marchons au pas, camarades vers notre front. Plonge-toi dans le front de tous les ouvriers, avec tous les frères étrangers.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann der Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein. Drum links, zwei, drei, und der Platzgenosse ist. Freu dich ein in die Arbeitereinheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
So
Left, 2, 3, so left, 2, 3, the work that we must do. March on in the Workers' United Front, for you are a worker too. The forces of Spanish reaction, the military, church, the aristocracy, and landowning class would not let the electoral victory of the Popular Front stand. On July 17, 1936, a military rebellion began. To the general's surprise, the revolt was defeated in almost all of the big cities and much of the countryside by the efforts of a poorly armed but defiant populace. On the 18th of July, in the patio of a convent, the people of Madrid formed the 5th Regiment.
El 18 de julio, en el patio de un convento, el pueblo madrileño fundó el 5º regimiento.
Venga, jaleo, jaleo, suena de una ametralladora y Franco se va a paseo, y Franco se va a paseo.
Con Lister y Campesino, con Galán y con Modesto, con el comandante Carlos, no hay miliciano con miedo.
Venga, jaleo, jaleo, suena de una ametralladora y Franco se va a paseo, y Franco se va a paseo. 4 battalions defend Madrid. They're the best of Spain, the reddest flower of the people.
Son los 4 batallones que Madrid están defendiendo. Se va lo mejor de España, la flor más roja del pueblo.
Venga, jaleo, jaleo, suena de una ametralladora y Franco se va a paseo, y Franco se va a paseo.
Con el quinto, con el 5º regimiento, madre, yo me voy al frente porque quiero entrar en fuego.
Venga, jaleo, jaleo, suena de una ametralladora y Franco se va a paseo, y Franco se va a paseo. Venga, jaleo, jaleo. On the verge of defeat, Franco called for help, and Hitler and Mussolini responded with arms, men, and planes. General Mola's army headed south as Franco's Spanish Foreign Legion and Moroccan troops, transported to Spain by German planes, moved north from Andalusia. They met at the fortress town of Badajoz on the Portuguese border.
Journalist J. Allen, Chicago Tribune, Elvas, Portugal, August 25th, 1936. This is the most painful story it's ever been my lot to handle. I write it at 4 o'clock in the morning, sick at heart, in the body, in the stinking patio of Pensión Central. I've come from Badajoz, several miles away in Spain. I've been up on the roof to look back. There was a fire. There are burning bodies. 4,000 men and women have died at Badajoz since General Francisco Franco's rebel foreign legionnaires climbed over the bodies of their own dead through its many times blood-drenched walls. I tried to sleep. You can't sleep on a soiled, lumpy bed in a room at the temperature of a Turkish bath, with memories of what you've seen tormenting you, with the smell of blood in your very hair, and with a woman sobbing in the room next door.
We saw the dust cloud grow large in the distance, shut the strong gates and we took to the wall. Rifles can't hold off a motorized column. Rifles are useless when bombs start to fall. But we made them pay dearly for each street and plaza. For more than a day, we fought hand to hand, till the last of our comrades were caught in the churchyard. There they held out to the very last man. In the street by the market, they searched all the houses, dragged out the men, and they killed them with knives. The fine Spanish captain gave them permission, loot the men's houses and use the men's wives. And they searched through the city for young ones and workers, searched us for weapons or trade union cards. They'd rip off the blouses, look at the shoulder for a bruise that is made when a rifle kicks hard. Then they herded us down to the Plaza de Toros, mounted machine guns high up in the stands. The Moors and the Legion shot hundreds and hundreds. The blood could no longer soak into the sand. The blood from the bodies of more than 2,000 made large crimson puddles on blood-soaked red sand.
Franco's rebel army headed east, rolling through town after town. Resistance was crushed, and supporters of the Republic were executed. In 2 months, the drive reached Madrid. The Republican government fled to Valencia.
The people of a popular front, Madrid, enraged by the terror bombings of working-class districts and inspired by Dolores Ibarruri, La Pasionaria, 24 hours of exhortation on the radio, met the enemy at the gates of the city. An ill-armed and untrained people's militia versus Franco's trained forces and the bombs of Hitler's Luftwaffe.
The eyes of the world were on Madrid. Franco proclaimed that the next day he would celebrate Mass at the cathedral in Madrid. When a column of men, uniformed and armed, marched in formation through the city at dawn, some people thought that Franco had broken through. It was the Tailman Battalion, German anti-fascists, volunteers led by Hans Beimler, who escaped from a concentration camp and helped organize the newly formed international brigades.
From eyewitness Pablo Neruda. One morning in a cold month, a dying month, spattered with mud and smoke, when mercenary jackals could be heard howling with rifles and bloody teeth, when we now thought the world was filled only with devouring monsters and furies. Then, breaking through the frost of a cold Madrid month, through the mist of dawn, I saw with these eyes I have, with this heart that sees, I saw the bright and spirited and commanding combatants of the lean, tough, mature, ardent, and steadfast brigade arrive.
Spaniens Himmel bereitet seine Sterne über unsere Schützengräben aus. Und Morgengruß schon aus der Ferne, bald geht es zum neuen Kampf hinaus.
Die Heimat ist weit, doch wir sind bereit. Wir kämpfen und siegen für dich. Freiheit.
Spanish heavens spread their brilliant starlight high above our trenches in the plain. From the distance, morning comes to greet us, calling us to battle once again.
We're far from our land, yet ready we stand. We're fighting and winning for you. Freiheit.
Will not yield a foot to Franco's fascists, even though the bullets fall like sleet. With us stand those fearless men, our comrades. For us, there can be no retreat.
We're far from our land, yet ready we stand. We're fighting and winning for you. Freiheit. We're fighting and winning for you. Freiheit.
The Germans were joined by French, Polish, and Italian anti-fascists. Eventually, there were volunteers from 52 countries. They brought their songs with them and they shared them. One song was sung in every language of the international brigades.
Arise, ye prisoners of starvation. Arise, ye wretched of the earth. For justice thunders condemnation. There's a better world in birth. No more traditions change our mind. So rise, ye slaves, no more enthralled. The earth shall rise on your foundations. You have been lost, you shall be all. Is the final class conflict? Let each stand in his place. The international working class shall be the human race. 'Tis the final class conflict. Let each stand in her place. The international working class shall be the human race.
Volunteers from Ireland went to both sides of the Spanish conflict. O'Duffy in his blue shirts with the fascists, Frank Ryan in the Connolly column with the Lincoln Battalion. 10 years before I saw the light of morning, a comradeship of heroes was laid. From every corner of the world they came sailing, the 15th International Brigade. They came to stand beside the Spanish people, to try and stem the rising fascist tide. Franco's allies were the powerful and wealthy. Frank Ryan's men came from the other side. And even the olives were bleeding as the battle for Madrid it thundered on. Truth and love against the force of evil, brotherhood against the fascist class.
Viva la quince brigada. No passer on the bridge made them fight. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let's all remember them tonight. Many Irishmen, they heard the call to Franco, joined Hitler and Mussolini too. Propaganda from the pulpit and newspapers helped old Duffy to recruit his crew. Then the word came from Maine to support the Nazis. The men of cloth have failed again. When the bishops fled the blue shirts in Dunleary, as they sailed beneath the swastika to Spain. Viva la quince brigada. No passer on the pledge made them fight. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let us all remember them tonight. This song is a tribute to Frank Ryan, Kit Conway and Guinea Cody too, Peter Daly, Charlie Reagan and Hugh Bonner. Though many died, I can but name a few. Viva la quince brigada. No passer on the pledge made them fight. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let us all remember them tonight. Let us all remember them tonight. Let us all remember them tonight. A call came to New York from the Communist International in Moscow for volunteers, and hundreds responded from across the U.S. Communists, socialists, activists, labor people, artists, people in exile from their fascist governments, and so on. Most people supported the Spanish Republic, including Eleanor Roosevelt, but reactionary forces, including industrialists, the Catholic Church, and right-wing nationalists actively supported the fascists. The American government forbade its citizens from going to Spain, and passports were stamped not valid for travel in Spain.
The other day, a friend of mine applied for a passport.
You're not going to Spain, are you? Asked the passport office clerk.
Heavens, no. I'm going to Switzerland to study cheese. Why do you ask?
This passport is not valid for travel in Spain. The use of this passport for that purpose will constitute a violation of Section 221 of Title 22 of the United States Code, which makes it unlawful to travel to Spain. These are troubling times. I don't know what to think. No one who comes in here is going to Spain. Some of them are going to Paris to study art. Some of them intend to photograph the cathedrals. I even had one man who said he was going abroad to study spots on the moon. But somehow they all seem to end up in Spain in the loyalist trenches.
All this suggests to me that the tide of traffic towards Spain must be exceedingly great.
It is the policy of America to encourage its citizens to take a neutral stance towards foreign conflicts.
Do you mean that the person should be indifferent to which side wins or loses?
That seems to be the idea.
For a man to be indifferent about a vital issue, the outcome of which will affect the whole world and everyone living, he would, of course, have to be an absolute ass.
Yes, I believe that would be necessary.
The American volunteers' first action was in February 1937, defending Madrid in the Jarama Valley. Casualties were staggering. There's a valley in Spain called Jarama. It's a place that we all know so well, where where we all learn the true cost of freedom. And so many of our brave comrades fell. We are proud of the Lincoln Battalion and the fight for Madrid that it made. There they fought like true sons of the people as part of the 15th Brigade. There's a valley in Spain called Jarama. It's a place that we all know so well, where we all learned the true cost of freedom. And so many of our brave comrades fell. And so many of our brave comrades fell.
Dave Smith, wounded in the Battle of Jarama. Spain changed my whole life. I saw a country struggling, ordinary people, peasants, poor people. They couldn't even read or write. But when these young people came up to the front, we became an integrated army, the people struggling against the oppressing group of fascists. It left an indelible impression on my mind. So when I got back, I decided that I was going to be committed to furthering the cause of the people, whatever I did. Spain was the most important thing I did in my life, next to getting married.
Hilda Roberts, nurse, Medical Bureau. I met wonderful, hard-working people. Most of them were so poor they had never had medical care before. They didn't know what a doctor was. If you were not rich, you never saw a doctor or a nurse. I treated one girl with a shrapnel wound, and she was so thankful. She never dreamed that she would be cared for by a nurse or be treated in a hospital. There was this one poster that said, ¿Qué haces tú para la victoria? What are you doing for victory? And I remember this one peasant girl. She would point to the poster and say, I scrub floors. Whatever they did, they felt it was for freedom and democracy.
The Republic fought on, constantly starved for supplies, without help from the democracies, who in the name of a phony neutrality declared an embargo on any arms in support for Spain. But Franco had the unceasing support from Hitler and Mussolini. Approximately 35,000 volunteers from 52 countries joined the International Volunteers, and of them, between 5,000 to 6,000 were killed. Of the roughly 2,800 American volunteers who went to Spain, 800 were killed.
In July 1938, the Republic was able to mount a large surprise attack on the fascist lines across the Ebro River. They reclaimed mile after mile of lost ground, but their rifles could not hold against the bombs of the Luftwaffe.
In an effort to force Germany and Italy to withdraw their forces from Spain, the Spanish government disbanded the international brigades. German and Italian military aid to Franco only increased.
The Republic tried to hold out until the world war they knew was coming began and the democracies would finally aid democratic Spain. They missed it by a few months.
On November 1st, 1938, La Pasionaria addressed the international troops as they were about to leave Spain.
For the first time in the history of the people's struggles, there was the spectacle, breathtaking in its grandeur, the formation of international brigades to help save a threatened country's freedom and independence. Communists, socialists, anarchists, Republicans, men of different colors, differing ideology, antagonistic religions, yet all profoundly loving liberty and justice, they came and offered themselves to us unconditionally. Today, many are departing. Thousands remain shrouded in Spanish earth, profoundly remembered by all Spaniards. You can go proudly. You are history. You are legend. We shall not forget you, and when the olive tree of peace is in flower, entwined with the victory laurels of Republic of Spain, come back. Come back to our side, for here you will find a homeland, those who have no country or friends, who must live deprived of friendship, all will have the affection and gratitude of the Spanish people, who today and tomorrow will shout with enthusiasm, "Long live the heroes of the international brigades."
Ruth Davidal, an American nurse in Spain, was touring the United States in a battered ambulance, urging citizens to lift the devastating embargo that was strangling Spain. She was in Tampa for a rally on the last day of March 1939, when Franco entered a vanquished Madrid.
The church was full, and people were standing outside in the street, and they all wept because Spain was being defeated. And when Spain then actually fell, I cried my eyes out. I don't like to talk about it. It was a really terrific sorrow.
Dorothy Parker, Spanish war correspondent, wrote in 1952,
I went to Spain and I became a member of the human race. I met the best people anyone ever knew. I had never seen such people before, but I shall see their like again, and so shall all of us. If I did not believe that, I think I would stand up in front of my mirror and take a long, deep, swinging slash at my throat. For what they stood for, what they have given to others to take and hold and carry along, that does not vanish from the earth. This is not a matter of wishing or feeling, it is knowing. It is knowing that nothing devised by fat, rich, frightened men can ever stamp out truth and courage and determination for a decent life.
Albert Camus. It was in Spain that men learned that one can be right and still be beaten, that force can vanquish spirit, that there are times when courage is not its own reward.
Taste of ashes, wounded hearts, we leave our best in this bloodied earth. The enemy remains the same. The war goes on, just the front has changed. One day this war will be but a memory in time, and the wounds will heal in this shattered land, and our country will one day be free. Defeat will be but history, their example our legacy. One day the world will be at peace, and what might have been will one day be. One day this war will be but a memory in time, and the wounds will heal in this shattered land, and our country will one day be free. Defeat will be but history, their example our legacy. One day the world will be at peace, and what might have been will one day be. One day this war will be but a memory in time, and the wounds will heal in this shattered land, and our country will one day be free.
The war over, 500,000 Spaniards fled Spain. The French put most of them in concentration camps, along with those internationals who could not return to their countries. The brutal repression in Spain continued. Franco executed more than 100,000 people after he won the war. 35,000 died in labor camps. There are 30,000 bodies in a mass grave near Franco's monument to himself.
Year after year, the veterans of the Lincoln Brigade never wavered in their support for the cause of justice and a democratic Spain. When the American veterans returned home, they formed the Veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade organization to continue the fight against fascism worldwide and to support Spanish refugees and those in Franco's jails and the welfare of all those who fought in Spain.
When they returned home from Spain, they were given a hero's welcome by their supporters, but treated as traitors by the U.S. government. During the McCarthy period, they were labeled subversives and listed twice on the Attorney General's list, at the beginning for Abraham Brigade and at the end for veterans of the Lincoln Brigade. They were blacklisted, called before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, and hounded by the FBI. Yet, they continued to be on the front lines of every fight for social justice, organizing labor unions, civil rights marches, opposing the war in Vietnam, U.S. intervention in Central America. They were chanting, "No pasaran, no pasaran."
Rosario Pistone, volunteer. They stopped me on street corners. They came up to me on buses. They went to all my employers. At least once a week for 15 years, the FBI came and threatened me. I tried to keep my cool during the whole period. It was hard. I told them, "You want to talk about me? Fine. I'll talk about me, but I will not say anything about anybody else." They didn't want to know anything about me. They knew I was just an anti-fascist, that I went to Spain to fight the Italian fascists, the kind of Italians that made my father run away from his country. I did manage to get married, but it was relatively late, when things were over, when I could risk going out and meeting people. But let me tell you, I would do everything over again. I would do exactly the same thing.
Viva la quince brigada, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Viva la quince brigada, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Solo es nuestro deseo, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Solo es nuestro deseo, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Acabar con el fascismo, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Acabar con el fascismo, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. En los frentes de Jarama, rumba, rumba, rumba la. En los frentes de Jarama, rumba, rumba, rumba la. No tenemos ni aviones, ni tanques, ni camiones, ay Manuela. No tenemos ni aviones, ni tanques, ni camiones, ay Manuela. Viva la quince brigada, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Viva la quince brigada, rumba, rumba, rumba la. Que sea cubierto de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela.
Okay, that just about wraps things up. Stay tuned for the Vets Portrait slideshow, which gets bigger every year as ALBA finds more photographs of vets. At this moment, we'd like to acknowledge the passing of two longtime members of the Bay Area group, Corrine Thornton and Tony Ryan. And now is the moment for you to commemorate any family members or friends that were vets by entering their names in the chat. For anyone who wants to see the show again or to tell friends to see it, the link to the recording will be posted on the ALBA website, Facebook, and YouTube channels. Go to alba.org, where you can also find out about upcoming programs, and you can even support the work of ALBA by making a donation on the website. Remember to vote on the November 8th election. And again, remember to vote November 8th. Help save democracy in our republic. Viva la Republic. Stop fascism in this country. No pasaran. No pasaran.
We shut the strong gates and we took to the walls.
There's a valley in Spain called Jarama. It's a place that we all know so well. It was there that we fought against the fascists. We saw a peaceful valley turn to hell. From this valley they say we are going, but don't hasten to bid us adieu. Even though we lost the battle at Jarama, we'll set this valley free, for we're through our Lincoln Brigade. From this valley they say we are going, but don't hasten to bid us adieu. Even though we lost that battle at Jarama, we will set this valley free, for we're through. You will never find peace with these fascists. You will never find friends such as we. So remember that valley of Jarama and the people that'll set that valley free. From this valley they say that all this world is like this valley called Jarama. So green and so bright and so fair, no fascist can dwell in our valley, nor breathe in our new freedom's air. From this valley they say that we're going, do not hasten to bid us adieu. Even though we lost the battle at Jarama, we'll set this valley free, for we're through.
Viva la quinta brigada, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Viva la quinta brigada, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Luchamos contra los moros, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Luchamos contra los moros, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Mercenarios y fascistas, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Mercenarios y fascistas, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Solo es nuestro deseo, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Solo es nuestro deseo, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Acaba con el fascismo, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Acaba con el fascismo, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. En los frentes de Jarama, rumba la rumba la rumba la. En los frentes de Jarama, rumba la rumba la rumba la. No tenemos ni aviones, ni tanques, ni cañones, ay Manuela. No tenemos ni aviones, ni tanques, ni cañones, ay Manuela. Ya salimos de España, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Ya salimos de España, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Por luchar en otros frentes, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Por luchar en otros frentes, ay Manuela, ay Manuela.
Thank you.